The day my parents told me they wouldn't help me, I cried alone in a car parked outside a gas station at 2 in the morning with $37 in my bank account and nowhere to go. I didn't know it then, but that night was the beginning of everything. There is a specific kind of pain that doesn't have a name in any language. It's not the pain of losing a stranger. It's not the clean, sharp pain of a wound you can see and point to. It is the pain of being turned away by the people who made you, the people who were supposed to be your safe place, the people whose voices you heard before you understood what voices were. My name doesn't matter for the story. What matters is that I was 26 years old, broke, exhausted, and sitting in my car outside a gas station in the middle of winter with the heat off because I was afraid to waste gas. My phone screen was cracked. My jacket had a hole in the left sleeve. I had just hung up a call with my mother, a call I had rehearsed for 3 days, and she had said no, not with cruelty, not with a scream or a fight. She had said it the way people say no when they decided the answer before you even ask, calm, final, like closing a door. And my father, I already knew, would say the same. He always did. I want to tell you this story not because it ends in revenge, not because I want you to feel sorry for me. I want to tell it because somewhere out there, someone is sitting in their own version of that car with their own $37, wondering if they were born into the wrong family or if they are simply not worth helping. And I need that person to hear what happened next. All of it. The part that hurt, the part that broke me, and the part that 1 year later changed everything. To understand why that phone call destroyed something inside me, you have to understand what my family looked like from the outside. Because from the outside, we looked like love. We had the kind of house that other kids wanted to come to. My mother kept it clean the way some people keep churches clean, carefully, devotedly, like the cleanliness itself was a form of prayer. There were always candles on the kitchen table. There were always blankets folded on the couch. There were family photos on every wall, and in every photo, everyone was smiling. My father was a man who worked hard and wanted people to know it. He talked about sacrifice the way other people talk about religion, like it was the highest virtue, like suffering was proof of character. He had built his small business from nothing, and he reminded us of that regularly, not cruelly. He was proud, not mean, but the pride sat heavy in our house sometimes, like furniture you couldn't move. My mother was softer, or she seemed softer. She was the one who remembered your birthday twice, once at midnight and once in the morning. She was the one who put an extra blanket in your bag when you went on school trips. She knew your favorite meals by heart and cooked them without being asked when she sensed you were having a bad week. I was their second child. My older brother had left the state for college at 18 and built a life 3,000 miles away that they bragged about at dinner parties. I had stayed closer. I had tried to stay close on purpose because I thought closeness meant something. I thought being nearby, being present, being the one who answered calls on the first ring, I thought all of that was a kind of investment, not a transaction, but a relationship, a thread between people that grows stronger the more you hold it. I had moved out at 22, gotten a job in marketing at a mid sized company, rented a small apartment with a roommate, and was doing what everyone said you were supposed to do, building it slowly, trying. I called my parents every Sunday. I showed up for every holiday. I fixed things when things needed fixing. I was there. What I didn't know, what I was about to learn in the hardest possible way, was that being there is not the same as being seen. The year I turned 25 was the year everything began to quietly fall apart. My roommate moved out to get married, and I couldn't afford the apartment alone. I spent 2 months trying to find someone to share the space with, and when I couldn't, I had to break the lease and move into a cheaper place. A one bedroom in a part of town I didn't know, in a building that smelled like old carpet and cooking oil. I told myself it was temporary. Most things feel temporary when you're young enough to believe in temporary. Then the company I worked for downsized. Not a massive layoff, just a quiet restructuring. The kind that sounds like corporate language until it has your name attached to it. I was one of 11 people let go in a single Tuesday afternoon. They gave us a box and a handshake and the name of a website with interview tips. I took the bus home with my box on my lap and sat in my new apartment that smelled like someone else's life and thought, okay, I'll figure this out. I applied everywhere. For 3 months, I applied everywhere. I tailored every cover letter the way they tell you to. I practiced answers to interview questions in front of my bathroom mirror. I wore my good shirt to every interview. I got callbacks, then second rounds, then nothing. Or I got offers that paid less than my rent. I turned down two of those because I did the math and they actually made things worse. My savings ran to nearly nothing. I had one credit card I was trying not to use. I had a few $100s in checking that I rationed the way people ration water in a drought. I stopped ordering anything that wasn't on sale. I turned my heat down to 58 degrees at night and slept in two sweaters. I stopped telling people how bad it was because admitting it out loud felt like it would make it permanent. And then came the moment I had been dreading without knowing I'd been dreading it. My rent was due in 12 days. I was $400 short. I had done everything I could do. I had asked my bank about a personal loan and was told my credit wasn't sufficient. I had sold the only electronics I had, a laptop I no longer needed, and a camera I had saved up for years ago. I had borrowed small amounts from two friends who gave what they could and asked no questions because they were good people. But I was still short. And so, one Thursday night, I sat at my kitchen table with a phone in my hand and thought about calling my parents. I want to tell you how long I sat there before I dialed, because I think it matters. I sat there for 2 hours. 2 full hours, because asking for help from your own parents, the people who raised you, the people who used to carry you when your legs were tired, the people who spent 18 years making sure you were fed and sheltered, asking them for help should not have required 2 hours of courage. But it did, because somewhere in the 18 years since childhood, something had shifted in our house. Love had become conditional in ways nobody announced out loud. Help had started carrying a price tag made of judgment and expectation, and even though no one ever said it directly, I had felt it. I had learned to be careful about what I asked for, careful about how I appeared, careful about the image of myself I showed to them, because the image mattered more somehow than the truth. But I was out of options, and they were my parents. And $400 was nothing to them. I knew it was nothing to them. My father had just redone the kitchen. My mother had just booked a cruise for their anniversary. $400 was a dinner out for them. So I called. My mother answered on the second ring. Her voice was warm the way it always was when she picked up. That warmth used to make me feel safe. That night, it made me more nervous because I was about to ask her to do something beyond the warmth, and I didn't know if anything existed beyond it. I explained my situation clearly and calmly. I told her about the job loss. She already knew about that. I had told her in a previous call. I told her about the gap in my rent. I told her the exact amount I needed, $400, not a loan with no terms. I told her I would pay it back in installments once I was working again, which I was close to. I had an interview the following week that felt promising. I just needed this one bridge. There was a silence on the phone after I finished. The kind of silence that isn't nothing. It's full. It's a decision being made in real time while you wait on the other end, trying to breathe normally. Then my mother said she needed to talk to my father, and then she called back 20 minutes later and said no. She gave reasons. The reasons sounded reasonable in the way that rehearsed things sound reasonable in the way that rehearsed things sound reasonable. They were worried about setting a precedent. They didn't want me to become dependent. They felt that I needed to learn to handle my own problems because that was how a person grew. They had struggled too when they were young and it had made them stronger. They believed in me. They knew I would figure it out. Every sentence landed somewhere soft inside me and bruised it. They believed in me, but they wouldn't give me $400 to keep a roof over my head. They didn't want me to be dependent, but I had never asked them for money. Not once in my adult life. Not for a car, not for school, not for moving expenses. Nothing. They wanted me to learn to handle my own problems, but I had been handling them. I had been handling them alone for months. I wasn't calling in defeat. I was calling at the exact moment a bridge was needed, the way any person might cross a bridge and then keep walking. I didn't say any of this on the phone. I said, okay. I said I understood. I said not to worry about it and that I would figure it out. My voice was even. I hung up before it stopped being even. And then I got in my car because I needed to go somewhere, anywhere, even if it was just the parking lot of a gas station 2 blocks away. And I sat there in the dark for a long time. I want to describe what that felt like because I think everyone who has ever been failed by someone they love knows a version of this feeling and maybe has never heard it described out loud. It wasn't anger at first, anger came later. What came first was something quieter and more devastating. It was the rearrangement. The feeling of looking back across your whole life and watching certain memories reshuffle themselves, reorder, take on new meaning. The birthday calls now had an asterisk. The extra blanket in the school bag now had an asterisk. The family photos with all the smiling now had an asterisk. Because love that disappears, when it costs something, is not quite the same thing as love. It is something else. Something that looks like love in comfortable light but cannot hold its shape in the dark. I sat in that car for over an hour. Then I drove back to my apartment. I called the two friends who had already lent me what they could, and one of them, without me even asking the full amount, told me she had a little more she could put in and that I could take my time. I covered the gap another way, barely, through a combination of selling a few books I cared about and skipping every optional expense for the next 2 weeks. I kept my apartment. I made rent. But something had changed. The job interview the following week did go well. I got an offer, not perfect, but real and better than nothing. I accepted. I started rebuilding. Slowly, carefully, the way you rebuild something after you've learned it wasn't as solid as you thought. I paid back both friends within 2 months. I started building an emergency fund for the first time in my life because I had learned at the cellular level that I was the only safety net I was going to get. I didn't eat out. I didn't buy things I didn't need. I tracked every dollar with the obsessive focus of someone who has genuinely run out of them and never wants to feel that way again. But something else was rebuilding too. Or maybe more accurately, something was being built for the first time. A version of me that had stopped waiting for my parents to see me. A version of me that had quietly, without ceremony, stopped performing for their approval. When you grow up in a family where love feels conditional, you spend an enormous amount of energy trying to be good enough, trying to be impressive enough, trying to give them reasons to choose you. That energy was enormous. I hadn't realized how enormous until the night it became obvious they had already made their choice, and it wasn't me. When the energy of trying to earn their love stopped pouring outward, it had nowhere to go but inward, and slowly, reluctantly, it started becoming something else. It started becoming mine. I stopped calling every Sunday. Not dramatically, not as an announced punishment. I just stopped feeling the urgency of it. The calls had been, I realized, another form of maintenance, of keeping the image polished, of being the good child who stayed close. Without that urgency, the calls became occasional, a few times a month, then a few times a season. Each time I called, I was cordial and warm and fine. I just wasn't available the way I used to be. I had quietly, without saying a word, begun to redirect myself. 6 months after the phone call, I was promoted. A small promotion, nothing enormous, but real and deserved and earned entirely by my own work. I did not call my parents to tell them immediately the way I would have once. I sat with it for a few days, let myself feel it privately, and then told them on the next regular call as though it were one item among many. My mother was happy for me. My father said he knew I'd pull through. I said thank you and moved on. I was building something. Not against them, not in spite of them, for myself. For the first time in my adult life, genuinely, honestly, just for myself. I made new friends that year, people I met through work, through a running group I joined because I needed to do something physical with all the stress I was carrying, through a book club that met on Tuesday nights in the back of a coffee shop. These were people who knew me without any history attached, without any family narrative, without any image to maintain. They knew me as I actually was, and they seemed to like that version of me. It was disorienting at first, and then it was something close to wonderful. I started going to therapy. Not because I was in crisis, the crisis had passed, but because I had unexamined rooms inside me that I had been locking and walking past for years, and I was finally ready to open them. My therapist was a quiet, precise woman who asked questions that were small on the surface and enormous underneath. She helped me understand things about my family that I had felt for a long time without being able to articulate them. She helped me understand that being refused in that moment wasn't about money. Money was just the instrument. It was about the truth of what I was worth to them when worth had a cost attached. And she helped me carry that truth without being crushed by it. By the time the year was ending, I was not the same person who had sat in that parking lot in the cold. I had a savings account with real numbers in it. I had a job that was growing. I had friends who knew me. I had a therapist who was helping me understand myself. I had a relationship with my parents that was honest in a new way, even if none of the honesty had been spoken out loud. Honest in the sense that I was no longer pretending everything was fine when it wasn't, and no longer bending myself out of shape to earn something that was supposed to be free. I was, by any measure, doing better. I was, in the quietest way I'd ever been, okay. And then, almost exactly 1 year after that phone call, my parents called me. It was a Sunday afternoon in late winter. I remember the light through my window, that particular low winter light that makes everything look like an old photograph. I was making tea and reading when my phone rang and I saw it was my father. My father almost never called me. My mother called. My father talked to me when my mother passed him the phone. That he was calling directly made me set down my book before I answered. His voice was different. I noticed it immediately because you know the voices of your parents the way you know the rooms you grew up in. In the dark, by memory, every corner familiar. His voice had something in it I had never heard before. Not quite fear, something related to fear, but more fragile. Something that sounded like a person who has been holding something very heavy for a long time and has finally had to admit it's too heavy to hold alone. He told me that he had been having symptoms for several months that he hadn't told anyone about: dizziness, some chest tightness, occasional pain in his left arm that he had been attributing to the way he slept. He had gone to the doctor 3 days before, finally, after my mother pushed him, and the doctor had found something concerning. Not a definitive diagnosis yet, but concerning enough that further testing had been scheduled urgently, and the doctors had been very clear about the seriousness of the situation and the changes that needed to happen immediately. He was frightened. I could hear it. He was a man who had built his identity around being unfrightened, around being the one who had already gone through the hard thing and come out stronger. And he was frightened, and he was calling me. He didn't ask for anything specific in that first call. He just told me what was happening. But somewhere underneath the words, beneath the health information and the doctor's names and the test dates, the real message was obvious and unspoken. He needed me. They needed me. Not $400, not a temporary bridge. Something larger and more sustained and more human than that. I listened to everything he said. I asked the right questions. I was calm and steady on the phone in the way that he had not been calm and steady on the phone a year ago when I needed him. I told him I was glad he called me. I told him we would figure out what needed to happen. I told him to take care and that I would call the next day to check in. I hung up and stood very still in my kitchen for a long time. I want to be honest about what I felt in those moments because I think dishonesty here would cheapen everything. I want to tell you I felt pure compassion and nothing else. I want to tell you the year of pain evaporated instantly at the sound of my father's frightened voice, and I was flooded only with love. That would not be entirely true. What I felt was complicated. There was fear for him, genuine, immediate, real. He was my father and he was sick, and I loved him. That was true. That fear was real. There was also something else, something harder to admit, that sat alongside the fear. It was the awareness, sharp and undeniable, that the situation was an almost exact reversal of what had happened a year ago. That the people who had told me I needed to learn to handle my own problems were now calling me with a problem they could not handle alone. That the people who had worried about setting a precedent of dependence were now, whether they intended it or not, depending on me. I am not proud of how long that awareness stayed in the room with me. It stayed for a while. I let it. Then I let it go, because here is what I had learned in the year between these two phone calls. I had learned what kind of person I wanted to be, and I had learned it specifically because I had been shown in the clearest possible terms what happens when people choose a smaller version of themselves. I did not want to be a smaller version of myself. I had not come through the hardest year of my adult life: the cold apartment, the empty bank account, the months of rebuilding, the therapy, the real work of becoming someone I could respect. I had not done all of that just to arrive at a test like this and shrink. The answer was always going to be yes. Not because I owed them a debt for creating me. Not because I was afraid of what it would look like if I said no. Not even because I had forgiven them fully. That process was still ongoing and I knew it. The answer was going to be yes because of who I had decided to be. Because the year of rejection had not made me harder or crueler or more withholding. It had, against all reasonable expectation, made me more certain of what I valued, and what I valued was showing up for the people I loved, even when they hadn't shown up for me. That is a different kind of love than the love I had been raised with. It doesn't need to be earned back. It doesn't require the ledger to balance. It is chosen, not conditional. It is something I built, not inherited. I drove to my parents' house the following weekend. I helped them navigate the medical system, which is terrifying and confusing even when you're well. I sat with my mother in waiting rooms. I helped research the condition, asked questions the doctors expected them to ask, but that they didn't know to ask. I coordinated with my brother, who flew in from across the country. I cooked meals during the weeks when my father's energy was low. I was there. My father's condition was serious but treatable. The doctors caught it in time. With medication and lifestyle changes, the prognosis was good. Over the course of several months, he stabilized. He is today doing better than he has been in years. During those months, something else happened, something nobody planned or announced or scheduled. My parents began to see me differently, not immediately, not in a single dramatic moment of recognition, but slowly, the way light changes. So gradually, you don't notice it shifting until you look up and realize the whole quality of it has changed. My mother said it to me one evening when we were alone in the kitchen after dinner, washing dishes the way we used to when I was a child, and the rule was that whoever cooked didn't have to clean. She said it quietly, not looking at me, her hands in the soapy water, and she said that she was sorry, not a big sorry, not a formal apology with an explanation attached. Just those two words, and a voice that sounded like it had been carrying them for a long time and was glad to put them down. I told her thank you. That was all, but it was enough for that moment. My father has never apologized in words. He is not a man who does that, but he has changed in the smaller ways that sometimes mean more than words. He calls me now, actually calls me, on purpose, without a specific agenda. He asks about my life with curiosity instead of evaluation. He listens. One afternoon, he said, out of nowhere, that he was proud of me, not for a promotion or an achievement, just proud of me, for who I was. He didn't elaborate. But I understood. That moment, that small, unannounced moment, was the one I hadn't known I was waiting for. I thought a lot about what this story means, not just what happened, but what it means. And I think the truth of it, the real truth, the one that cuts through all the easier versions, is this: the people who didn't help you at your worst do not automatically become your enemy. And helping them at their worst does not make you weak or foolish or a pushover. It makes you someone who chose a different definition of strength than the one you were handed. The world will tell you that strength means protecting yourself from the people who hurt you. And there is wisdom in that. Real, necessary wisdom. Boundaries are not cruelty. Protecting your peace is not abandonment. Learning when to leave a relationship that only drains you is not a failure. All of that is true. But there is another kind of strength that the world talks about less, and it is the strength of choosing to love more carefully, more honestly, more consciously than the love you were given. Not the performance of love, not the image of love hung on a wall in a photo where everyone is smiling. The actual thing, which is messy and inconvenient and sometimes means showing up for people who didn't show up for you, not because you have forgotten what they did, but because you have decided that your love is not going to be defined by theirs. I did not forgive my parents in a single moment. Forgiveness, I've learned, is less like a door opening and more like a path you walk slowly in the dark over a long time. Some days I am further along the path than others. Some days, the memory of that cold car and the closed door still aches. That's okay. The ache doesn't mean they haven't healed, it just means I'm human. What changed between the two phone calls? The one a year ago that broke something in me and the one this year that rebuilt something I didn't know could be built was not my parents. They were the same people, more or less, doing what people do when they're afraid or proud or limited in ways they don't fully understand. What changed was me. The $37 version of me and the version of me who answered the phone and drove to their house were different people, living inside the same story, making different choices about what to do with what had been done to them. That's the only thing any of us ever really controls, not what we're given, what we do with it. If you are in the parking lot version of this story right now, cold, alone, just hung up with someone who should have said yes and said no, I need you to hear this. The no they gave you is not the verdict on your worth. It is information about them, not about you. What you do next, how you carry yourself through what comes next, the person you build yourself into without their help. That is the only thing that matters now. Build it well, not for them, for you. And if you are somewhere further along, if you've already come through and you're wondering what to do when the tables turn, when the people who didn't help you are the ones who need help now, I can't tell you what the right answer is for your specific story. Only you know the full weight of what you've survived. Only you can decide what you have left to give and whether it's safe to give it. But I can tell you what choosing the harder, larger version of yourself felt like. It felt like the first full breath after a very long time of breathing carefully. This story isn't over. The relationship with my parents is still being rebuilt, slowly and perfectly, one honest moment at a time. The version of me that came out of that year is still, honestly, learning to trust that it was real, that I actually made it through, that the thing I built is mine and no one can take it. I made this video because I think there are more people in this story than anyone talks about. People who were failed by their families and then had to figure out how to carry that without letting it become who they are. People who helped anyway and wondered if that made them stupid. People who are still in the cold car, still waiting for permission to believe they're worth helping. You don't need their permission. You never did. If any part of what I said tonight touched something in you, something you've been carrying alone, something you've never quite heard put into words, leave a comment. Tell me your version of the parking lot. I read them. I will read yours. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who is in the cold right now, not because the video needs the views, but because the person you're thinking of needs to know they are not alone in this. Subscribe to this channel if you want to keep hearing these kinds of stories, real ones, unpolished ones, the ones that don't have clean endings but have honest ones. And take care of yourself tonight. Whatever that means for you, take care of yourself tonight. Legacy of pain, real stories, real pain, real strength.